One measure of the success of African American women's activism is our ability to recreate the positive, molding, and nurturing features of a wholesome home. Hello, I'm Pamela E. Foster, a student in Dr. Akinyele Umoja's Fall 2024 Black Activism Seminar on Social Movements at Georgia State University. As part of our class, I executed a service project to analyze the dynamics of a social movement. Specifically for Project South, Institute for the Elimination of Poverty and Genocide, I share with you here a webinar on a Black woman leader in Atlanta during the Reconstruction and Nadir period of the Black Freedom Movement. That's a period that ended roughly during World War I. The particular Black woman who's the subject of this webinar is Lugenia Burns Hope. The webinar is a companion to an overall exploration of Burns Hope's life. This companion focuses specifically on her social movement work as a co-creator of the Black YWCA Hostess House movement, a movement of spreading home life social capital among African Americans. Lugenia Burns Hope, wife of the first Black president of both Morehouse College and Atlanta University, that is, John Hope, is most recognized for her leadership of the Neighborhood Union Social Reform Organization. Founded in Atlanta in 1908, the Neighborhood Union is crucial for understanding Black movement success. An array of scholars say the Neighborhood Union laid the groundwork for the grassroots component, the community building element of the civil rights movement. Arguably, Burns Hope's work with the YWCA Hostess House also is a model for Black movement work. It's a model for emphasizing the comforting and nurturing, the Christianizing elements of home. These elements of home life are ones that I find central in my research on Black families' genealogy book content. These books are rife with stories of home life, detailing how enlightening heart and hearth experiences make useful lives possible. To illuminate Lugenia Burns Hope's home life activism, I'll explain the scope of the YWCA Hostess House, its Atlanta development, and how the house provides a model for home life activism no less important than Lugenia Burns Hope's other work provides a model for community building. So first, the scope of the YWCA Hostess House. From its inception in New York in 1858, the YWCA mission has been to, through women, improve society's temporal, moral, and spiritual welfare. It did this throughout the Civil War, and in his 2021 book chronicling the Army's USO work, historian John Provon notes that when the US entered the war in 1917, the YWCA already was in action. Within the first few months of the US entering, the YW began opening hostess houses. These houses provided not only the soldiers the most home-like place on post, but also gave visiting mothers, wives, and sweethearts accommodations and a reception room to meet. Some couples even got married in the hostess house. The cafeteria, which served homemade pies, tarts, and dainties, and chicken fries, was well patronized. Now, the U.S. involvement in World War I ended in after just about a year. The number of hostess houses grew to approximately 100, and some continued or reemerged during World War II. The philosophy of the hostess house is in keeping with the YW's social morality stance. This philosophy included promoting the perils of and preventing unwanted children and marriages. Hostess houses created an environment in which people beneficially could work out issues of men and women socializing before and during war. Issues such as behaving as if they're married before they are, quickie marriages, etc. In that vein, there's a funny story of a grandson of Winston Churchill saying about World War II that, quote, "My mother was actually the fifth young lady to whom my father had proposed marriage in the 3 or 4 weeks since the war had broken out. And my mother was the first to accept," unquote. At the same time that the YW was gearing up to provide the hostess house homey hospitality spaces for World War I, University of Kentucky history and Africana Studies scholar Nikki Brown documents that it also was working to formally racially integrate its activities. The YW named Black New Yorker Eva Bowles as executive for its Colored Work Committee. And a primary goal of that committee, Brown says, in addition to full integration, was to have Black women deciding upon and implementing the strategy for people we serve. The first African American hostess house was at Camp Upton on Long Island, New York, opening in November 1917. It grew to host nearly 5,000 visitors per week. New York and New Jersey were training grounds for hostesses who would staff roughly 16 to 20 Black hostess houses. According to the co-edited book Men and Women Adrift, the YW was able to hire 46 new Black secretaries to manage the facilities, all college or normal school graduates or with equivalent experience. The YWCA staff organized special courses at Camp Upton and Camp Dix in New Jersey, where the women spent 4 weeks of intensive management and program training. The hostess houses provided a refuge from the daily racism that the soldiers faced in the camps. White commanding officers often disregarded the particular problems of their Black troops, and racial tensions were inevitable. The YWCA hostesses tried to create a home-like ambiance where the men could relax and feel accepted. In this genteel environment, many of the Black men and their families had their first opportunity to come into intimate contact with the Black middle class. As a result, upward mobility for members of the race through education, manners, and morals seemed achievable to masses of Black people. The hostess houses were advertised all over the country and beyond in posters like this one. Other posters were fashioned from a newspaper cartoon, as we see here, pointing out that both the men and the home folks know the hostess house is a wholesome place to be, a place that provides a grand and glorious feeling. To give you more of an idea of both the kinds of women who ran hostess houses and the house's vast national and international locations, we see here that Leola Wheeler, who taught at the State Teachers College in Virginia, served in both Panama and China. Here we see a school newspaper mention of her hostess house work in Panama. So from New York and New Jersey, hostess houses spanned such cities as Paris and cities in Germany. No matter the locale, the houses always took on the character, the hominess sense of the women running them. Again, the wholesome entertainments reflecting the socializing habits of the women leaders. Both the exteriors and the interiors varied by location based upon the women involved and what properties could be received as gifts, purchased, etc. Here we see a hostess house in Carabel, Florida. We've got Houston, where we see the library here opened on the same day as the hostess house, a fitting day, Valentine's Day, 1918. We've got Waco, Texas, New London, Connecticut, Fort Meade, Maryland, Charlotte, North Carolina, Cherry Point, North Carolina, Taylor's, South Carolina. About Des Moines, Iowa, scholar Sarah Jane Eipelberry notes that regular YW branches sometimes were used for creating the uplifting environments of home. She notes that the Des Moines branch accommodated 3 residents and a gathering space for large traveling groups, such as out-of-town church choirs from Black churches, and provided programming space for weekly meetings of the Book Lovers Club, a separatist literary circle dedicated to Black authors and Black culture during a time when circulation specialists at most public libraries had yet to embrace multicultural talents and tastes. In addition, Vesper services regularly dotted the branch calendar, as did teen dances, forums on physical health, family life, dating, employment, and classes in interior decorating, handicraft, basketball, and badminton. Later, the Des Moines branch served as an official hostess house. Here we see some of the young Black women who utilized the Des Moines branch almost as if it were a hostess house, even before it officially was one. Again, the hostess house was one of those places on the post where female family members could visit with soldiers, And Franklin Roosevelt pronounced in 1918, or that is Theodore Roosevelt, that this site in Iowa was one of the best in the nation. History scholar David Krugler notes that the YW set up hostess houses to aid not just soldiers, but also young Black women who could now contribute to the war effort in a structured, chaperoned environment. Every agency having for its object the development and advancement of the race is asked to cooperate with the club. Given the importance of the hostess house in serving Black people, Atlanta's African American reformers were keen to get in on the development of the hostess house. So next we'll overview that development. Enter Lugenia Burns Hope and the Neighborhood Union. Burns Hope led this group of Black women from 1908 to 1935. Its mission was to build playgrounds, clubs, neighborhood centers, to develop a spirit of comradeship among neighbors, to promote child welfare, to impart a sense of cultural heritage, to abolish slums and vice, and to improve the overall moral quality of the community. You can see how operating a hostess house would help carry out its mission. According to Burns Hope biographer Jacqueline Ann Rouse, a late Georgia State University renowned scholar, Burns Hope was particularly prepared for hostess house work, in part because of her experience with America's most famous settlement house. Rouse says Burns Hope began early on the career of community activism that would eventually distinguish her as a Black reformer. During her adolescent years in Chicago, she worked with several charitable agencies, including Jane Addams's Hull House. She carried this involvement to Nashville, Tennessee, when, as a new bride, she accompanied her husband, leading Black intellectual and eventual college president John Hope, to Roger Williams University, where he was then an instructor. There, she conducted classes in arts and crafts and in physical education for the female students. Within a year, the Hopes moved again, this time to Atlanta. Soon after she arrived, she became a member of the group of women who were working to provide daycare centers for the children of the West Fair community. And this core group later became the Neighborhood Union, the first female social welfare agency for Blacks in Atlanta. For 25 years, she led this agency in providing medical, recreational, educational, and civic services in Atlanta's Black communities. By 1930, the structure and policies of Hope's Neighborhood Union had been adopted by Haiti and Cape Verde in their efforts at community building. There's that example of serving as a model of community building. In 1915, Burns Hope was a part of the delegation of Southern Black women that attended the YW's national meeting in Louisville with a mission to expand the YW's services beyond their then extensive reach in the Black colleges and normal schools. Then, during World War I, Hope Burns, like the other Southern Black women as a group, responded wholeheartedly to the war effort. She and the neighborhood union conducted the YWCA's Atlanta War Work Council for Black Soldiers. They petitioned for better police protection, access to public facilities, and creation of more recreational centers. Hope's success at directing the Atlanta work led to her promotion to the position of National Supervisor of the YWCA's Black Hostess House work. Burns Hope considered the hostesses the last vestiges of feminine influence on the troops before they were thrown into the tumult of war. We think about men rushing off fiendishly into combat, she wrote for the New York Age. So much devolves upon women to maintain and promote real civilization in the midst of this present orgy of death and destruction. The women redecorated the house with comfortable furniture, magazines, colorful curtains for the windows, and a piano. The hostess house also provided academic and social activities for the troops. Hostesses taught literacy courses and Bible workshops, led group hymns, and in many cases, volunteered their time after hours with soldiers who needed individual instruction. One soldier declared that the sight of usually raucous troops sitting quietly with the hostesses in community sings surprised him so much that he requested the hostesses write to his mother, telling her that soldiers actually sing hymns as well as swear and gamble. You mean you miss your mother, recognized Smith, and you'd like to be near a woman of your own kind. See here Burns Hope with her own family, demonstrating rituals and traditions of home life. Her home life also was the setting for business and social gatherings. Burns Hope and the other ladies involved with the hostess house, not unlike the two women pictured here, used their genteel styles and mores to benefit the hostess house's recreation of Southern Black values. In a typical setting at the hostess house, you can see the men reading, playing cards, being served lunch, entertaining a date. Lynn Dumunel, a social and cultural historian at Occidental College, says that the need for hostess houses for African American soldiers and their families was a particularly pressing one. Like white reformers, Black women were concerned about sexual immorality in the camp communities. But African American women viewed the need as even more crucial. National Association of Colored Women's Club's president, Mary Talbert, urged women's organizations situated near the Army cantonments to see that colored girls and women do not go near them, so that the social evil, usually so prevalent near war camps, may not be attributed to our women in any way whatsoever. Although leaders like Talbert wished to counter vicious stereotypes about Black women's sexuality, they also recognized the particular problems African American men and their relatives faced in bases where racism was a daily fact of life, and where African American soldiers had limited opportunities for recreation because neighboring communities were explicitly off limits to them. African American YWCA organizers and local women created a total of 16 hostess houses during the war, which they viewed with great pride as being attractive places for comfort, recreation, and rest. As was the case with the hostess houses for white soldiers, these facilities provided meals, entertainments for men, and offered female relatives and friends a safe environment for visiting. Given the quality of their work, the Black YWCA women hoped that the model set by hostess houses would endure. So finally, we'll touch upon the hostess house as a model for Black women's home life activism. Historian Brown calls the Colored Hostess House Network the most far-reaching social welfare agency to involve African Americans during the war. And she notes that the work invested African American women with enormous pressure to speak for the race. Black women spoke as accomplished organizers and implementers of long-standing women's public work that spreads home life traditions. They note the reliance on established alliances and the success-enabling operating structure of hostess house management implementation. As for home life tradition, it was imperative to Burns' hope that young women were acquainted with, acculturated to, wholesome Black traditions. The backgrounds of the hostess house workers involved a certain level of religiosity, given the underpinnings of Christian rhetoric in the YWCA and the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. The women expressed and maintained a sharp awareness of social hierarchy, that is, separate gendered spheres in social interaction, minimal contact between unmarried men and women, an acute awareness of class and status, and reserved interaction between whites and African Americans. As for alliances, Story and Brown points out that African American women's war work found its beginnings in the club work and local organizations. That is part of the movement model we've seen play out elsewhere, including the United League's development as a dynamic social movement in northern Mississippi in the 1970s. By placing community work conducted by the YWCA, Black women's clubs, religious missions, Southern industrial schools, and other organizations within the settlement tradition, Syracuse University history professor Elizabeth Lash Quinn highlights that these movements, these organizations have significance in the settlement house tradition. And she points out as well that the Black freedom movement has a general failure to recognize the enormous potential in alliances with these groups. Hope and Bowles and their comrades seized the chance to mobilize the network of middle-class women they had cultivated through the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. While the organization had always furnished a reservoir of talent and resources for potential staff and volunteers, the war years offered unprecedented opportunities. As for operating structure, the success of the Hostess House symbolized an important accomplishment for the African American war workers across the nation, providing or proving them as effective organizers of their own war work. And Scholar Brown details how the operating structure of the Hostess House actually worked to facilitate its success. There were, of course, as is the case with all models, challenges with the hospitality activism model. For one, or the home life activism model. For one, despite the popularity of the hostess houses, the number of women assigned or accepted into this work fell far behind the number of troops enlisted in the war. Relative to the demands of the enlisted men abroad and at home, few African American women were chosen to address the needs of hundreds of thousands of African American men. 150 workers and approximately 20 houses were not going to be enough. Partly to blame were the narrow criteria for the type of woman the YWCA approached for hostess house work. Just as the NACW drew its membership from a relatively small pool of middle-class, college-educated African-American women, the YWCA also attracted that same type of woman, if not the same woman. Contemporarily, to overcome some of the challenges of Black women's home life activism model, I work with an age and class diverse group of women to spread stories of home life that are captured in our genealogy books. It's noteworthy that extended Black intergenerational families span the class spectrum. Thus, the family provides an institutional conduit for social capital diffusion. And working with these diverse activists, I developed the agapic agency theory of positive ancestral self-identity to explain how home life, that is the heroes at home, grounded in education and faith, actually works in Black genealogy book stories. We spread these home life intergenerational stories beginning in spring 2025 at hbcuheritagehome.com. In summary, the scope of the YWCA Hostess House is vast, geographically, socially, and culturally, and it includes spreading wholesome Black home life values. Lugenia Burns Hope was a leader in the Hostess House movement, both nationally and in Atlanta. And the Black women's home life activism model has strengths, such as its growth from and coordination with pre-existing women's groups, as well as weaknesses, such as its draw from a narrow social class pool. So now you know something of Lugenia Burns Hope and the YWCA Hostess House movement, how together they spread home life social capital. I'll end with an excerpt from a Black genealogy that demonstrates the centrality of the habits and enlightenments of wholesome home life. One of the fondest memories of my childhood is sitting at the dining room table, listening to my father read Little Brown Baby by Paul Laurence Dunbar. My younger sister sat on his lap and I in his chair next to my mother. The poem starts like this. Little brown baby with the sparkling eyes. Who's daddy's baby and who's daddy's child? Come to your pappy and sit on his knee. What you been doing, sir? Making sand pies? Look at that bib. You's as dirty as me. Look at that mouth. That's molasses, I bet. Come here, Mariah, and wipe off his hands. Bees gonna catch you and eat you yet. Being so sticky and sweet. Goodness lands. Who's Pappy's darling and who's Pappy's child? Father always started off the poem by stopping periodically to catch the dialect, but near the end, he recited the words as if he were ready to burst into song, having gotten into the rhythm of the words. The entire house was still. Everyone was taking in the pictures created by the words of the poem's author and the conviction in the robust tenor voice of the speaker. For me, I cherish those family moments. How many daddies sat at home with their little girls to read to them? My favorite lines were little brown baby with sparkling eyes, and who's Pappy's darling, and who's Pappy's child? There's a line in the poem that says the boogeyman is going to come and get the child. Daddy looked into the den to pretend the boogeyman was coming to get us as he read. We would scream with delight. Daddy has always been an awesome storyteller, whether there was a moral to his tale or not, although most of the time there was. There were always quotes from his grandmother, like, "A hard head makes a soft behind," or, "As long as I have my 2 feet, I can do it myself." And the excerpt ends with, the recollection of his childhood memories always provided a proud glimpse of who the Johnsons were, how they functioned in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the impact the church, the family, and food had on daily life. These stories also gave me, for some reason, a strong will to succeed. I am both excited and relieved to know that these stories are in print. Firstly, because I have a chronicle for myself to know who a part of my family was and is. Secondly, it is vital for my children to understand their roots and the truths about themselves in this great land we call America. long before they are told a misconstrued story by society. I consider this book to be a treasure, one that needs to be on the shelves of every American family. It is my hope that more fathers and mothers sit and tell their children their stories. So much more than just laughter comes to light. That ends this webinar on the YWCA Black Hostess House movement, featuring Atlanta's own Eugenia Burns Hope. I invite you to learn more about the Black women's activism in the Hostess House movement, as well as other home life, domestic art spheres, by consulting these and other sources. Thank you for joining us today at Project South to learn a bit about Eugenia Burns Hope's home life activism in co-creating the Black Hostess House movement.